Hello, and welcome to the Realigned Journey, the unfiltered guide to self discovery and reconnection. I'm Siera Sambrosky, your host, and together we'll investigate and discover the ways we have lost touch with our true selves and explore the ways we can reconnect to it. This season, I'm starting each episode by asking my guest a question. What moment or event was pivotal in changing the way you saw yourself and or your life? And this week I have with me Joy Pedersen. Joy is a doctor of divinity, non-denominational ordained minister, and licensed and certified in a whole bunch of things that I'm sure we're going to get into. She is an international best-selling author and the founder of Express Success LLC, which serves an international clientele. Her private practice identifies and releases the hidden causes of people's personal and business challenges, including negative emotions, energy, memories, and limiting beliefs. She has specialties in clearing darkness and current and past lives trauma. No matter what, she is helping her clients receive direct guidance from God. So, Joy, thank you so much for being here. I can't wait to get into all of this with you.
Well, thank you for having me.
So let's get started with the question that I start each of my episodes with these days, which is tell us about one pivotal moment or experience you had that really shifted everything for you, that really maybe changed the way you saw yourself, changed the direction in which you were going, just changed your life in general.
I think there's been several, but I would say probably the most pivotal was the day that Archangel Michael appeared before me, asking me to write his book, Wisdom of the Guardian, and join him in a healing practice.
Okay, that would be significant for sure. So tell us about that because that is awesome.
Well, it was really funny because I would hear this booming voice every Wednesday night for months before
Wow.
saying, and it would be audibly every Wednesday night, which was funny because it was so predictable. You're going to find out who you are soon. And I'm like, what is that? And it really took me back. But when he appeared before me, then he explained everything. And it was funny because it was an invitation to really change my life and my work and my focus.
Mhm.
And I realized later I didn't really probably ask many questions. I just like was stunned and said yes. But he said, when he asked me about the book, I said, how many chapters? He said 22. I'm like, okay, well, I was already doing automatic writing for a decade,
Okay.
but that seemed like, okay, that was feasible. I never thought to ask him, like, what are we going to be healing?
Hmm.
It just seemed like, okay, yeah, we'll be healing things. But that turned out to be really extraordinary because we took on a lot of world work, clearing darkness, clearing the who's who in the Bible that have been reincarnated.
Hmm.
And all of it was through or under the guise of a regular spiritual healing practice.
Okay.
But then there was a lot of, not just through clients who turned out to be reincarnated individuals that many would be familiar with, all here at this pivotal time, the end of times, to shift us into a new world. And it was my job to help clear their path so they could do what they're here to do. But we were also clearing I would say, the errors throughout history that needed to be cleared to rebalance things, things
Okay.
that were created by, say, darkness or errors in thinking or actions because we didn't know any better. We were unconscious at the time. So, it took on a life of its own. I mean, I lived in a place where it was like the who's who of heaven were coming in and out of my place for
Hmm.
various reasons and to get me to shift things as a spiritual healer on the planet. because you need the people on the planet to do the actual work.
Mm-hmm.
They work through us. So I was the character on the field that was on the kind of the front lines that they were working through, and it was very eventful, let's put it that way.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I have so many questions about this. Okay. So first of all, what were you doing? Were you still you were running your own business before Archangel Michael appeared to you, or you had it, what were you doing?
Okay, so the background is probably very relevant in a way because the path was I could see this path was set up right from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a kid, I knew I was here for the end of the world as we knew it. They told me I wasn't going to die this lifetime, and it was going to be my last lifetime. I, how much do you understand about that? I just knew it, and
As a child, yeah.
right. So we'll table that. And then I was living in New Jersey, was inspired to move to California, and I thought, well, when in Rome, why not work for a motion picture studio? That sounded like it would be fun. I was a paralegal at the time, so I got a job when I got there in the entertainment in an entertainment law firm, and then asked people like, "What do you think I should do?"
Mm-hmm.
And they said, "Oh, I think you'd be great in PR." I was so green, I didn't even know what that meant, but
Uh-huh.
they said parties and celebrities. I'm like, "Oh yeah, that sounds fun."
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun when you put it that way.
Right. And then I said, "What's the best studio to do that at?" Paramount. I'm like, "Okay, I'm going to go do it over there." So I followed every lead and guidance I received from others. And then when I got my ideal job doing television publicity at Paramount, people were calling me and asking me, "How'd you get your job?" And I wanted to reciprocate and help them. So I was chatting with them and I was finding that everyone was struggling in some way or another, not only sometimes with a job, but even finding friends and feeling, comfortable in LA because everybody's from somewhere else there. And they all moved there for the entertainment industry. So I wanted to help them and then looked for a solution. What set me apart? Well, as it turned out, I was too naive to know it was difficult to break into the industry.
Mhm.
But learning about the law of attraction, it made sense that you really have to do things with intention and have clarity in what you're wanting to create.
Mm-hmm.
So I started my company then and I started teaching the law of attraction,
Gotcha.
but
And
then
how long
learned
ago was this? I'm sorry to interrupt.
that was in the 80s.
Okay. Okay. So you were
So
definitely at the leading edge of all that kind of work for sure. You've been doing this a long
I've been
time,
doing this a long time.
and you were one of the people, like you said, people at the front of the whole movement. Because of course now I think a lot of people know about law of attraction. It's so
Right.
much more commonplace it probably ever has been. But in the 80s, I know it wasn't nearly as common.
Right. It wasn't as commonplace.
Hmm.
So when I taught it, I realized quickly that it wasn't the necessarily the whole answer because people would get consistent results in certain areas, but not all.
Hmm.
So I said, okay, there's something within the individual then that's blocking because I found the same thing within myself. We weren't
Hmm.
all consistent. So I looked for another solution. And that's when I was introduced to spiritual healing and the subconscious and understanding that the subconscious was your memory bank and computer, and that was the part of you that was manifesting your results.
Hmm.
So that was in 1986 that I learned about spiritual healing. And then I started really working more on myself than anything.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it was remarkable the shifts that I saw within myself, letting go of limiting beliefs, negative emotions, things like that. The baggage we kind of accumulate growing up as children,
Right.
not necessarily intentionally, but the byproduct of experience,
Yeah.
not all good experiences at the time. And
Right.
we carry that. But I also, when I was in Hollywood, was introduced to a friend of mine. Her husband was a past life therapist, and I always believed in reincarnation.
Okay.
But it was the door opener to be able to work with somebody to discover my own past lives. And
Hmm.
the interesting thing about that was after the third session, I said, gee, the information's right there. And when I accepted that, I was able to do it myself. So then
Gotcha.
I was able to use the spiritual healing and apply it to past lives where there was memories there, stuck
Hmm.
energies and emotions and errors and thinking and behavior that I was able to clean up.
Hmm. So, I mean, what was your childhood spiritual or religious background?
I
Because
was,
you're saying that you had these kind of memories about what your experience was going to be like in this life as a
Mhm.
child, being told that like you're going to see the end of the days as we know it, and that this was your final life, and you went into all of this stuff. It seems very openly. Doesn't seem like you required a lot of coaxing or there was much you know like somebody had to convince you to get into this stuff and move down that path. So I'm
Yeah, not at
curious
all.
about, yeah, I would say I'm curious about growing up, what was kind of the spiritual and religious background that
So
was in
I
your home?
believe I was really born awake, although when you awaken in general, you can be awakening your entire life to new information.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like I came in knowing it all.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but what I did is, as a child, I could see angels and demons and ghosts and aliens.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I didn't understand, for example, like how to necessarily deal with demons at the time, because
Right.
I actually learned how to go to sleep with them just like right there,
Uh-huh.
because I had no choice. But I didn't realize later that was almost like a teaching ground for me to understand them because it became a specialty to be able to clear them as an adult.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But my parents were Lutheran, so they raised me in, traditional Christian
Okay. And you were
household.
going to church on Sundays and all that jazz?
Yeah. And the funny thing is, I don't remember this, and it's a curiosity if I really brought it up what my experiences were to my family.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to think that I just kept it to myself and not discussed it. Although I remember my mom saying sometimes, but probably later in life, that she goes, when I tell her a story, she goes, "Is that this lifetime or another?"
Mm.
So she had to be somewhat open to all
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah, I guess part of why I always asked too is because I had such profound experiences when I was young and I had no context for it. You seem so like just naturally moved into it. And maybe it's just my life and the lessons that I'm here and my personality this time. But I was much more it was happening when I was a child. Largely I was really afraid of it. I had zero context for it. Um when people were coming in around my bed, because I heard and saw people the way I couldn't tell that nobody else could see them, right? And so when they're coming into my bed at night and they're standing around my bed, like I was terrified, I was scared.
Hmm.
And I also experienced a lot of stuff when people would say to me, like, well, where did you hear that from? Where did you get that? I'd be like, well, that guy right there told me, or I had distinct memories of being like going to my mother and saying, like, there's a man in the room and he looks like this and he's doing this. And she literally like ushered us out of the house because I was terrified. I was so scared that there was this man in my bedroom when I was sent to go pick out my clothes for school for the next day, right? And like the neighbor comes over to like clear thinking that there was an intruder in the house because I couldn't tell that they weren't there. And then I have all of this negative reinforcement because nobody else could see them but me. So then I was getting in trouble for lying or, whatever. And so I'm always curious, other people that are born sort of awakened, as you say, like with having this experience already, um, what their background was, like how that shaped them. Because for me, it meant that I largely shut everything down. Not that I didn't still have a whole lot of experiences that are would have been unexplainable. Now I can explain them, but they were unexplainable for many, many years
Yeah.
until somebody gave me context and was like, no, this is a spiritual gift and you're not crazy and you're not schizophrenic and this is happening, because I went through a phase where I thought I was schizophrenic in my 30s. Well, I had a few weeks where I was thinking I was gonna have to go commit myself. But so I'm curious, you're saying your mom was pretty open, at least at some point she shifted and was like, was that this life or the past life? But you don't have any recollection of them really talking about anything or any kind of exposure to stuff when you were a kid that gave you kind of a sense of
No.
peace or like just okay, this is okay and just keep moving through it.
Yeah, it seemed like they were accepting of, whatever, but I was a shy kid anyway, so I probably didn't voice a lot of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There was an incident though, it was really interesting because I realized about the law of attraction early, and I think what they and
Mm-hmm.
it caused me to believe that my life was orchestrated and they were teaching me things without it being in my face necessarily. So I didn't have experiences where I would see people in my room all the time,
Mm-hmm.
which would probably be unnerving. I think in my case, they showed me things at certain pivotal times so I'd learn something, it would
Mm-hmm.
register in some manner because it was necessary later.
Mm-hmm.
So an incident that occurred to me, I was in the back porch and I'm looking out the back and I had lovely thoughts and I saw a dozen angels and I'm like, that's lovely.
Mm-hmm.
Then my thoughts turned to death and were really dark. Now,
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't my nature to go there. So I think they might have even implanted those thoughts just to show me that when I thought those things, the backyard was replaced with vultures instead of those angels.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw that your mind had something to do with what you were seeing.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't necessarily a reaction to what was there.
Mm-hmm.
So everything I think in life is really teaching all of us what's necessary for our future roles.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it always is. It's awesome when we
Yeah,
have awareness around that, right? Like that will shift everything for you when you have awareness around the fact that, hey, every experience is really for my highest and best good. So how do I shift my perception of this? How do I shift my view on this so I can see where the gift is in it?
exactly. And I also, to that point, I think a lot of the times we're struggling, it's because there are lessons that we have chosen to learn before we got here. And then also there's karma that we're meant to play out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't look really appealing in the moment, but it has a higher purpose than long term.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, you're now more grown and you're out in Hollywood, you're paralegal, you're shifting into this place of opening yourself up, learning law of attraction, spiritual healing, great stuff. And was there anything you were doing in particular to really cultivate sort of this encounter that ended up being the encounter with Archangel Michael? Like, were you in a particular spiritual practice where you were like you talked about automatic writing and, were you like trying to learn to channel in some sort of way or interface with angels or because
I,
everybody wants to know how can I have an experience like this?
well, I don't think it was, I think everything I did was really to support me in the role that I was created for.
Gotcha.
So I was always meant to work with Michael. What
Mm-hmm.
I learned later was that I was created a eons ago
Mm-hmm.
with the intent of coming in this lifetime to help clear history. So this is a world of duality
Mm-hmm.
and experimentation. And even God came to me years ago explaining his origin. So it was really God explaining his awakening.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't know he always existed until one day he realized he existed. What was that? And what can I do about this? And where am I? And what am I? And so what happens is God then creates other things to understand himself and what is.
Mm-hmm.
We're a long way in the future after that original experimentation,
Mm-hmm.
but it was all from that origin.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so somewhere along the line, they realized, all this experimentation and all this duality here on Earth, where we're learning the difference between dark and light and best behavior, the the decision was made that somebody needed to be created to be set aside before all the corruption occurred.
Mm-hmm.
And then I could come in more pure to be able to clean it up
Mm-hmm.
because they didn't know how the experiment was going to end. There was always an end date in mind,
Mm-hmm.
and they wanted somebody that wasn't totally corrupted by the experience of it all to
Mm-hmm.
be able to come in and clean it up. So a lot of the work that I've done over the years has been on a broad basis to be able to clear the challenges that have faced humanity as a whole
Mm-hmm.
and the planet as a whole, and have the gifts and ability to be able to just clear it on a massive level.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been probably my higher calling. And then there's the business part where people can hire me to, clear their stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's the global impact that we've been clearing, the cause of oppression and martyrdom and slavery and different things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually interesting we're having this conversation today because this week, which was Holy Week in 2013,
Mm-hmm.
we ended up clearing a lot of those subjects. And then it would have been Good Friday on this Friday that year,
Mm-hmm.
Easter on Sunday. But that Saturday, I was called to do a ceremony with a couple of clients, and we ended up opening up heaven on earth.
Mm-hmm.
So this Sunday, which is March 30th, it was March 30th, 2013 when that occurred. We're celebrating the 12th anniversary of the opening of heaven on earth, which was the pivotal point in which we moved from a world run by darkness to being run in the light again.
Mm-hmm.
And then since then, there's been a lot of restoration of bringing in more light, clearing more darkness, restoring the imbalances, and, creating a new possibility. So since that time, there's been um, a lot more people awakened, a lot
Mm-hmm.
more people connecting and channeling the other side. I remember that the week after that, all the archangels were coming through and they're congratulating me and this is a big deal and this, that, and the other. And it was all exciting. And then at the end of the week, Michael goes, I have to stand in line waiting to talk to you this week. It was funny, but for me, it's a big occasion because the work that went behind it leading up to that, and then what I've seen occur since has been extraordinary.
So let's talk about this because I'm sure there's going to be plenty of people that are listening to this that are going to be hopefully really comforted and delighted by the fact that the tipping point, for the lack of a better term, of our moving into a different level of ascension and shifting that this current reality between lightness and darkness actually started 12 years ago. And so because I think a lot of people feel like it's happening now.
Right.
That so much of what we're witnessing during these days is really the crumbling or the disassembling or the destruction removal of all of these structures and paradigms and systems that we have been operating off of. And so that's why it looks like a shit show, to be very honest. And that's why, it seems like chaos and kind of like everything's going to hell in a handbasket. And yet, I fully believe what you're saying in that that tipping point actually started 12 years ago. So do you have clarity, or can you provide any kind of insight or explanation as to why does it seem like now is where that shift is occurring, where that balance between light and dark is shifting?
Well, it was interesting. Archangel Gabriel came to me last week and he says, this has been going on for eons. Even the opening of heaven on earth was prepared and worked toward for eons.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't know when that actual date was going to occur, but it was a major impact where you now have the light running the show, and now we have to keep clearing. We had to clear in order for that to reach a pivotal point, and then we have to continue to clear, and we have to continue to clear going forward to get the end result we're striving for,
Mm-hmm.
which is what heaven on earth really is intended, which is an environment in the physical of joy, peace, balance, freedom, and abundance for all to experience.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge, however, has to be the clearing has to occur through the individuals who still are holding crap within their system, their
Mm-hmm.
old baggage. So in the world of clearing darkness, the leadership has been released. They're moved to the light. There are lower entities and energies of darkness still operating, but it's more of the closets have been cleared. All the crap is in the middle of the living room floor now.
Okay.
And then we're sorting through it and go, okay, what works, what doesn't work? Oh, I didn't realize we had that going on in there. Now we get to look at it. We're facing what has been in the closet.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's been revealed. And then we go, oh, now what? But even though, like, for example, Lucifer is in the light, the whole story about the battle between Lucifer and Michael, that rift got healed in 2013. Also, people are in denial that they have darkness within them. For example, light workers in particular,
Mm-hmm.
I have found often are in denial that they have a dark side. But if you're in a world of duality, everyone has a dark side.
Absolutely.
Everyone has a light side.
Mm-hmm.
Bigger the light, the worse the darkness sometimes. And when the light workers are savvy enough, brave enough to go to their dark side and clean that up, that will shift things even faster in a more profound way. And it's a hard sell.
Mm-hmm. Well, for those that are only listening and not watching this, I'm making a lot of faces because I know this about myself. Like I'm fully aware of the dark side of what I'm capable of. Um, and I have lots to support that. Um, I'm not saying that I've acted on it, but I've always been keenly aware of the potential I have to be incredibly angry, cruel, toxic, destructive to myself and other. Like I've always been very, very aware of that. Um, and also I've I don't know that I've mentioned it on the show before, but certainly there's been some people that have talked with me that know that I talked about, you know, recognizing at like 14 years old, in the 80s, I was asking if I could go to therapy because which no one was then, because I had such a deep awareness that there had to be this different layer of happiness of like that I knew I had this kind of junk in me that I didn't want to hold on to anymore. And I think that you know, the capability for all of us to learn how to embrace that and integrate it. Look, it's like so much of what you're saying in that, God created us, as I understand it, to be this extension of his experiences. And in that, he wants to experience all things which we call dark and light, all things which we call good and bad, or just both polarities as we see it in this duality experience that so many of us identify with. And so to call them bad or to call them not good or to hold guilt and shame around it only keeps us stuck in sort of that end of the experience, right?
And the other thing to broaden that, because you're right about identifying those feelings that you have, but even beyond that, if we think about we have lived other lifetimes, and in those lifetimes, we're more unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
We made decisions that we didn't know any better at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we've created some karma, first of all, and that needs to get rectified. But also, if we were powerful beings in the past and we didn't know what we were doing and we were experimenting, doing the best we could at the time because we didn't know all of what we know now, that we created things that have a ripple effect that are impacting the all now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if we can go back to some of those other lifetimes and clear the characters that we were that didn't make the best decisions, that is one way of looking at it. Just clean it up. I
Mm-hmm.
always use the analogy, if you spill milk, you don't make a story about it, you just clean it up and move on.
I guess a good
Do the
analogy.
same thing with those darker lifetimes or those decisions. And then there's also, if you think about the world as a play, and there's all these different characters, we come in as players and decide, okay, I'm going to play in that character. There's all these different realities also. And in some cases, you might play a good character, and sometimes you want to play a bad character. And then you have those experiences of what that's like. The challenging part of it is if you've made errors that have hurt others or yourself or, you know, the planet, for example, you have to come back now and rectify it. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what we're all here to do, is
Mm-hmm.
we're here to clean up the mess we created through this experience of experimentation of dark and light, clean it up, and then we can move into the new golden age where everything has more of that peace, love, and abundance for all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let me ask you, can we intentionally, do you believe that we can intentionally clear up the karma, whether we have a memory of it or an understanding of it or not?
It's always between you and source.
Uh-huh.
So I believe everybody has that ability. If they surrender a situation to source, it's putting it in source's hands.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, as the ultimate arbiter, he can decide whether or not it's ready to be cleared or you still need a lesson. Because I have found when I do the past life work with clients,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we can just clear a boatload of things.
Mm-hmm.
And then other times I get into the actual story of what happened because the person needs to have the understanding of it for it to be fully cleared
Mm-hmm.
and released.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Interesting. Is there one of the things that when Archangel Michael originally came to you, besides telling you about the book, did he give you other types of deep insights that was he really the one that kind of, gave you the realization about sort of the course of the rest of your life and how things were going to transpire here on the planet and what your role was?
I have found that they tell you just so much, and then the rest is kind of organic and you learn in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I learned I could read my own past lives. When I made my big announcement that I was going to change my business focus to a healing business,
Mm-hmm.
the first individuals that came to me, I didn't realize until I worked with them that I could read their past lives.
Mm,
And then I also learned that the more I stepped into the gifts that I had and the calling that I had, that I was given new gifts, new insights, and the whole journey that I've gone through is learning really about how the world works as I continued down the path.
mhm.
So it was on the job training to a degree.
Mhm.
I later I ended up doing a lot more work directly with source, clearing world issues and learning how things would work. And there are times when I'd ask source a question like whatever about, how the world work, and he goes, "Do you really want to know?"
Mhm.
Like, well, sure. And then I would be like taken down for 3 days because I'm going, "Oh my God, I had no idea." Like
Yeah.
you learn these things.
Did I really want to know? Maybe not.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But what was interesting, when you mentioned the word shit show. This happened recently when we had the last hurricane.
Hmm.
So I was in the middle of the eye of the hurricane as it came through Sarasota last fall. And then I got the instruction to go through the eye of the hurricane.
Hmm.
And then Source says, look at Earth. And he goes, what do you see? And I said, a shit show. I said, and then he said, send the shit show to me,
Mm.
which I did. And then he said, now look and see what you see. And I said, a pristine earth. He goes, now the new earth can breathe. So we
Mm.
have a new earth and it's like beneath our feet.
Hmm.
As long as we can let go of that shit show, whether it's global or personal,
Hmm.
that to source.
Hmm.
So source can sort it out and help heal it.
Hmm.
We're trying to manage things ourselves and without asking, and even the angels can't help us unless we're asking, and we have to ask every day. And then they can help us sort it out and lead us into the right choice. So what we've made a mistake with in the past is not asking source for guidance and help. If we think of source as the highest aspect of ourselves,
Hmm.
and tune into that, the biggest part of us, the most brilliant part of us, and say, hey, what should I do here? We're getting the all knowing's perspective on perfect and right action. We take that and we can move through all of this with more ease.
Hmm. Hmm. Makes total sense to me. But also I fully understand and recognize even myself that, you know, it's a hard programming to break that says the more I do, then the more I'm going to get closer to the result I want, right? Or the more I do, then the I think even some ways and sometimes in a twisted way, we think, well, if I do all the heavy lifting here, then God can just kind of come in and take over and it makes it easier for them. But there's still this process of control then, and then there's still this misalignment to being in the energy that our human self somehow knows better or knows the course better than what would be shown or given or granted to us if we just let source take over for straight away, right?
Oh, yeah. No, well, you're reminding me of a couple of things. So, one, Isaiah came to me years ago and he said, you have to let go of your limited belief that you have to work for a living,
Mm.
which I haven't let go of yet, I can assure you. And I'm guilty of working too hard and not turning it over. And I had a perfect example of that one day when this was years ago, and I'm struggling with a project in my computer, and it was taking me hours. And then finally I said, "Oh, I should ask." Like so I asked Michael for help. And then I went back to the project and I got it done in no time. It was
Mhm.
effortless. I have no
Mhm.
idea what he did, how he did it. It just became seamless.
Mhm. Mhm.
And we have no idea how they can help. they sometimes they actually even upgrade our own coding, like just like a computer, they defrag us and they upgrade our computer programming within so we can address things with more ease.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily have to know the how, we just have to be able to surrender it and ask for the help.
Right. The surrendering part can be really difficult for a lot of people. Um, and they might get good at asking every day or saying every day, I surrender to you, but then their beliefs are not there. Their so then their actions and their thoughts aren't really aligned to that either. And I'm curious if you have some sort of advice or guidance to people as to how they can, because like I said, saying it and even having the intellectual knowledge that we should surrender into this, or we need to let go, and submit ourselves to being guided, to being in flow, to being receptive, whatever. Um, it's real, it's a lot easier to have an intellectual understanding of that and to even believe that on kind of that surface intellectual level. It's it becomes more challenging to actually root out the beliefs that don't believe that. And so therefore the thoughts and the actions that follow that kind of keep creating that resistance and that interference.
Well, I know one year I asked Source what he wanted me to do or teach, and he said, teach surrender.
Mm.
And when I started focusing on that for myself, I would think I was surrendered because I would say, okay, I'm surrendering this to Source.
Mm.
And then I would learn a little bit later down the road that no, I wasn't really that surrendered.
Hmm. Exactly.
And
Yeah.
it's really a process of the more you can really let it go and trust that Source has got it. Like if you had a secretary and said, take this and type this up, you're going to trust that that was going to occur.
Hmm.
It should be the same type of belief that, okay, you're surrendering it to Source. Source is going to take it over and handle it. You don't have to do that anymore. You're
Hmm.
not going to look over your secretary's, you know, desk and say, are you doing it? Are you doing it? Are
Hmm.
you like, how fast are you going? You don't do that. You just
Hmm.
trust that it's going to be done and you're going to be delivered the finished product.
Hmm.
Well, when you can do that with Source, it becomes easier. You're really letting it go. You're turning it over. You're not responsible anymore. I can give you an example of how beautiful it can work because years ago I had a feeling of despair. I don't remember even why,
Hmm.
but it was awful. I mean, it's an awful feeling to
Hmm.
feel despair. And I
Hmm.
go, I don't really like this. This is not feeling good. And I said to Source, please take it, if 5 minutes it was gone. I felt normal. Nothing was an issue. That's how quickly it can go if you really are able to let it go.
Yeah. You have to move deeper into that space of trust and belief because
Yes.
I would say
Yeah.
otherwise it doesn't really work. No matter how much you're pleading with your heart and crying and feeling like, please just take this from me. I need you to take this from me so bad. If there's something that's operating or running the show underneath that's still not in that place of trust and belief, then the relief will come. It just is going to take a lot longer than 5 minutes, right?
Right. And I've even find that with some clients. Some clients will they come to me, they want the help, but really when you give the healing, which is really between Source and them, I'm
Mm-hmm.
just facilitating, they
Mm-hmm.
can't always accept it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's something that's still aligned with a storyline. They want the being victim is holding them in some field of energy that they're more aligned with that than having the freedom that can come by really letting it go and turning it over to Source in that moment. I can
Mm-hmm.
identify where their storyline is and where it started,
Mm-hmm.
and we can clear that. But if, like, their inner child, there's an aspect of their inner child that won't relinquish it, they feel guilty about something, they really won't let it go. Sometimes it's deeper work to try to convince them, no, you really can let this go.
Hmm. Hmm.
But it can be challenging because there's some aspect of the person that's really not ready to relinquish it.
Hmm. So is there anything that like somebody listening that says, I really think, and I know exactly what you're talking about with clients, and also even myself, like I can have a very conscious, cognizant understanding of what is causing an issue for me. And that doesn't mean that there's not some part of me that isn't quite letting myself get rid of it or move through it or integrate it into a different context, right? um but certainly I think that people listening, one of the things that we always try and do here is to give them nuggets, practical things that they maybe can take with them after they've listened to this to kind of start moving the needle on something, right? So if a person is listening to this and they do have the cognizant kind of knowing, like, well, I realize I must have some kind of worth issue, or I realize that I must have some kind of shame that's taking over, creating insecurity or whatever. They may have this cognizant understanding, but they also feel like they can't quite move themselves through this place of actually turning it over. What's kind of one little practice or baby step or action step that they can do that will move the needle for them?
Well, one key practice is forgiveness of self, circumstance, and others.
Mm,
If we can accept that everyone's doing the best that we can, that they can, and we forgive it, then Source can actually heal it. God can only heal what we can forgive.
mm,
So if we're not willing to forgive something, if we want to hold a grudge, we just know that we're choosing to align with the challenge longer than necessary.
mm.
If we choose to forgive it, then the healing process can begin.
I love that. That's so important to hear and understand. And I think that it's also important to know that, and we're not the only ones to say this, but when we decide that we want to forgive something, it doesn't mean that we forget that we were hurt by this person.
It can be a challenge that you've had to face with a circumstance or a person that was uncomfortable, if not terrible.
Hmm.
But the only way to get beyond it is to forgive it.
Yeah. And that forgiveness, I mean, we say it and it's cliche that forgiveness comes into a place of, releasing ourselves from the event or experience and all of its effects. It's not about releasing the other person. Um, People say that all the time. And we know it to be true. And also, there are times where we have to own and accept that you holding on to it, you talked about like stories before, you holding on to the story of the experience is somehow feeding you more than cutting that energetic tie between you and that person and that experience. Because I think that's that pivotal moment for many of us where we start to finally move through something, right? Is where you say, I no longer want to participate in this old version, this old story, the part of me that's identifying as that victim or martyr or whatever, right?
I think people also need to understand that they're assuming that the other person is doing something to them
Hmm.
and they're coming from blame and judgment. And we should always let go of judgment of ourselves and others because sometimes we don't even know what's operating behind the scenes. And I remember
Mm.
having a session with a client who was totally annoyed with someone and a pattern kept repeating. And she was really having trouble forgiving that person and evolving out of that situation. So I looked into the situation and I said, well, part of the problem is you killed her in another life, and this is part of the karma that's coming back. Well, she laughed and she said, "Oh, I guess I can forgive her now." It's like she didn't realize she had a role in why that woman was behaving as she was.
Mm.
And then that whole relationship shifted because she could just, okay, now I can forgive it. This is, it's she wasn't seeing the whole picture.
Right.
So we don't always know the whole thing of what's going on or why we're even bothered by something. And if we just forgive ourselves and others as an automatic, we don't necessarily have to know the backstory.
Hmm.
We just have to be in a place of love and acceptance and non-judgment and then move on.
That's what I was just thinking as I was listening to you talk. I was thinking maybe for people that find that know they want to forgive, but are finding it difficult to forgive a particular person or situation or experience, because sometimes that that resentment and bitterness we hold is maybe towards God's source or even ourselves, right? Because we have it's a the first step could be about working on releasing or shifting the judgment around the person or the situation. Because when you start to loosen that binding on the judgment, then it allows you to kind of loosen up your whole perspective, your emotional, energetic attachment to that person in the situation. And I think it allows you to move into a place of being able to fully forgive and let go.
Yes, and you reminded me of something about if they're can't really trust source, they're going to have trouble surrendering to source.
Of course.
And a lot of the problem that people have in trusting source is religion has created storylines to cause people to believe that source is bad or someone to fear. And my experience has been that source will be more loving and forgiving than any individual that I've ever met. So
Mm-hmm.
it's people's perspective often about the judgment that and the punishment that makes it difficult. But
Mm-hmm.
also some of the stories in the Bible weren't really stories about God, and it was really the dark side that they were calling God, that God was the culprit. Now I'm going out and I'm saying, yeah, surrender to God. And they go, well, yeah, but God's going to punish me and this, that, and the
Mm-hmm.
other from old belief systems and training that it wasn't really source that was operating behind the scenes at that time. For
Mm-hmm.
example, one of the stories that I discovered in clearing before Heaven on Earth opened was the story of Abraham and Isaac. And the Bible says that God asked Abraham to sacrifice his son. When
Mm-hmm.
I went back into history to review that story as I was guided, I saw it wasn't God, it was Satan that was putting that thought in his head. Abraham didn't know any better because if you're the only channel in town at the time,
Mm-hmm.
who are you going to confer with?
Mm-hmm.
We can do that today with a lot of other people that can channel and get information. Hey, is this correct?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And having faith and belief in God and he's just going to listen could have ended up terrible had it not been the angel's permission to intervene if there's an untimely death.
Mm-hmm.
So that story has caused many of us to not want to serve God because what is God going to ask us to do? If he could
Mm-hmm.
ask his son to kill his son, what would he ask me to do? And I don't think I have the nerve to do something like that. So I'd better stay away.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
those kinds of stories may or may not have been accurate that were portrayed given God a bad rap. I've also said often, I said, I think God needs a PR job. And maybe that's where
Mm,
I got my training in publicity is to turn the opinions of others into God's favor because many people have turned away from God because of religion,
mm-hmm.
where God is the all-knowing, all-loving individual that has got your back, loves you regardless, and will take you where you need to go for your highest and best good. And then they're resistant because of old teachings that were inaccurate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, I think that maybe I should have you back at another time and we can go down that rabbit hole together and talk all about that because that's actually one of my favorite things. And honestly, I think you're doing a wonderful PR job for God's source. Um, and helping to shift that. I know you are with all the work that you do and all the ways that you are willing to show up and share that and help others. Joy, share with everybody listening how they can connect to you or learn more about your work or get your books or work with you maybe. Where can they find you?
Well, one is I have a free spiritual bundle gifts from joy.com, which anyone can access and it has a lot of information on there and ways to connect with me. I have a free group, Help from Heaven on Facebook. I have a group also, sacredcircle.live, which is a membership to help people awakening through their ascension. And we always do a healing once a month and also a training from Source and lots of goodies there. That's Sacred Circle Live. And then there's my site, joypedersen.com, I'm all, on all the social media. I'm easy to find,
Yeah.
and I'm happy to help anyone. I'm happy to give anybody just to get acquainted call to just chat and get to know each other, find out what their needs are and how I might be able to help them. And there's no obligation for that.
Okay. Awesome. And we'll make sure we get your websites into the show notes too. So anyone listening, if you jump over and look at the show notes, you'll actually see Joy's website so you can connect with her and get all those great goodies that she was talking about a minute ago. Sojourners, thank you so much for coming along on another episode and take care of yourselves. Continue to see the good in all that is happening in yourself and in the world. Until next time.